former Intel, 32 years in the IC, and then went into SAIC, Leidos, working the ground component that Rich talked about. And now I'm with SSL, which actually is building the systems we're talking about here. But I wanted to first start out as a former Army Intel civilian, defend the Army a little bit here, Rich, because have you ever heard the joke, you've got a Marine, you've got a soldier, you've got an airman in the room, and you say, secure the building. The Marine kills everybody in the building. The soldier puts concertina wire around the building. You know what the airman does? He takes out a 20-year lease. I also like to remind ourselves, too, that a vision without resources is a hallucination. And what the issue is at the moment is that we need the resources to match the rhetoric. And the rhetoric is not just government rhetoric, it's also commercial rhetoric. The whole idea of on-orbit servicing. Now, let me say, our firm, really there's a couple of big companies in the United States that are doing work, right? You've got Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, who used to be Orbital ATK, and then you've got my company, SSL, along with our Canadian arm up north of the border. And we've been doing the robotics for NASA, every robotic lander on Mars we've built for NASA something called Restore-L. That will be in low Earth orbit in a couple of years, and it'll refuel a satellite, Landsat 7. We started down a path with DARPA in a public-private partnership to build a robotic spacecraft that would go into geostationary orbit called RSGS, which is robotic servicing of geostationary satellites. Public-private partnership. Now let me ask you this question. How many people in the room have got $66 million handy that you'd like to spend this year? You won't start to get a return on investment until 2023, but by 2030 you'd get about $1 billion worth of revenue. If you've got the $66 million, come and let me know, because we'd like to have that conversation with you. Because see, we really do believe in everything that you're talking about, Brian. We really do believe in what the Air Force in particular, what the White House, what some in the intelligence community are talking about the idea of how you can do a lot of really important things for resilience, which is the thing, right? We need resilience with on-orbit servicing. The problem is the money's not there. And so when we start to talk about return on investment, you'll hear terms like first to market. Being first to market's a really good thing for a business person. Being early to market's not a really good thing. And so we were in a situation where we ended up having to terminate the agreement with DARPA, where DARPA was providing the launch and building the robotic arms, and we were a sub to NRL to build the robotic arms, and then we were building the spacecraft with our own money. And you were talking about, at one point, we were looking at over $200 million worth of investment out of our own capital. And then with some changes, we got it down to about 115 million, with 66 million required this year, and we just couldn't do it. You know, you might have heard of something like the geocom market. That's just a bumper sticker for the geostationary commercial satellite market, where you've got relatively large satellites parked up in geo. And we're the world's leader, have the largest share of that market, still do at SSL. But having almost nothing isn't saying much as the world leader. I mean, that market collapsed. It used to be there were 20 plus satellites in the peak. And these are satellites were in the $250 to $500 million range for these commercial satellites. And we and our competitors would build those. And the market caved. It caved. Last year we built one of those. Now that happens to be, has an impact in a company on their ability to do their own capital investments on things that they know need to get done going forward. But it also had another impact on this, specifically on on-orbit servicing. And that is the idea that if the geocom market itself has gotten soft and the money's not going to be necessarily invested there, that the owner-operators of those telecom capabilities are looking at other things to do, like low Earth orbit, hundreds, maybe thousands of small satellites. They're thinking through strategically, looking at what they're going to do next. And if that market itself is vibrating, if you will, and then that was the primary market for the idea of doing an on-orbit servicing mission with RSGS and GEO, you can start to see where it starts to get a little soft. We believe in that mission. I know Northrop believes that mission. Northrop has got a capability called MEV, which is a maneuvering element vehicle, which will grab onto a satellite and station keep it where you want, and it could be like added fuel, but it doesn't do repairs or anything like that yet. We believe in this mission and doing more sophisticated things, but the money's not there yet. And so just as you said, let's talk about commerce and the commercial aspects of the decision-making process. So we spent 6 months last year doing a very detailed analysis of the requirements. And unlike what we thought when we cut the deal with DARPA a few years ago, the requirements are really more on the DoD, on the U.S. government side, rather than it is on the commercial. In fact, our analysis showed that between 2021 and 2030, one satellite geostationary orbit could perform 23 missions, and those 23 missions would be 70% of them would be U.S. government, 30% of them would be commercial, and it would generate almost $1 billion worth of revenue, beginning with the first mission in about late 22, early 23. And that's not including refueling. We actually took refueling off the table in terms of costing it out. It was a variety of other functions. And if you're not familiar with some of the functions, I want to make sure I get them, articulate them all for you. You know, you think about refueling, we all hear about refueling, but there's the station keeping, the deorbiting of a satellite, the salvage of an orbit. If you launch a satellite and it doesn't get into the appropriate orbit, to be able to go up to it, hold on to it, and then move it into the appropriate orbit. Being able to salvage a deployment. So let's say your satellite got to the right orbit insertion, but it's just the antenna hasn't unfurled, or maybe your solar panel is stuck. To be able to do those kinds of maneuvers and repair it so that it could work. And then upgrades and augmentation, the idea that you could go up years later and do add a comm package to one that's maybe comm is not working now, or even attach a new sensor. Technology's improved, you could put a new sensor on it. So there are a variety of missions, but from the commercial standpoint, it comes down to, well, who's got the $66 million handy to spend in now year dollars for something where you won't start to recoup your cost for years. And so where I think I can kind of speak for most of the community on this on the commercial side is what we really need to see happen is the government is also kind of early in their development of their concept here. And so there's some study money being spent by the Air Force and others, but really not more than study money. And so what we need to see now is we need to see Capitol Hill, and we need to see particularly the Air Force, but really broader DoD, start to match that rhetoric with some real dollars. I mean, the Air Force has got a study that's just come out here, and it's coming out in March, where by name it refers to things like Restore-L and RSGS and MEV and other capabilities. But the current thinking of the military leadership is still that this needs to be a commercially owned and operated activity that can service government systems as well as commercial systems. And COCO, as that would be known, right? Commercially owned, commercially operated. And not be a government-owned, government-operated, or government-owned, commercially operated, at least for those kinds of missions, for defense missions. NASA, on the other hand, has been an early adopter and a believer in the idea that you could go government-owned, government-operated as really for science. And that's why Restore-L will be flown in a couple of years, and it will go and refuel Landsat 7, which is an imaging satellite. So that's the practical reality of the dollars and cents of it. You know, we were really, that was a last resort to back out of that public-private partnership with DARPA. We're still very supportive. DARPA is intending to try to find someone else. There be anybody else to make that kind of an investment to build the satellite, and then mate it with the arms and go forward. And we'll see where they'll go on that. We'll hold their cape, Superman. You know, we really believe in the mission. but it's the dollars. I would also then refer back to Confers, which I think you talked about earlier, Brian, where you talked about, you know, there's a consortium for execution of rendezvous and servicing operations. That's where the CONFERS comes from. And they've laid out a paper, and I believe you're on that committee, correct?
I am not on
Or
that
you're not,
committee.
but the papers come out, and I mean, they talk about things, really some common sense things, like make sure that you have redundant software. You don't want to have your robotic servicer have not fail and there's no backup and the thing crashes into your, you know, somebody's billion-dollar satellite, obviously. You want to have safe trajectories, so the thing is not always going to be operating on a daily basis. And by the way, in your mind's eye, what you should be thinking about are robot arms on a satellite, and we also have one, a dragonfly arm that's 3.5 meters long, and they have 7 degrees of freedom, these arms. And so they'll carry up basically a toolkit, and they can be reaching in and getting tools and opening up satellites and cutting wires and snipping things and putting it back together like a surgeon's, and then backing away from it. I mean, these things exist. I mean, we have these kinds of arms on ISS today, the International Space Station, had been on shuttle and so on, and then we're on Mars. So it's not like it's impossible to do, but these capabilities exist. So the safe trajectory would mean that it's not on an hourly basis operating on satellites. I mean, that only happens 23 times over a 9-year window. So most of the time it's not, and you want to make sure with these safe trajectories and where you are that you're safe and other satellites are safe. And then the other thing is to be safe physically and electromagnetically. Again, that's where redundancy, it's really triple capabilities come into play to make sure you're not inadvertently harming someone else. But so from the commercial slant on this, there's a lot of belief in the mission. It's necessary. Resilience is required. You know, why are we talking resilience? Because we know that our adversaries know that to level the playing field, we've heard eyes and ears. You know, you'll take it all out. We know that the priority of the Defense Department and the intelligence community at the moment is space situational awareness, and then going into a proliferated LEO, where you're not going to be as much in GEO anymore. GEO is not as safe. You're more vulnerable in GEO. If you come down to LEO, the conjunctions are more complicated, and so on. And so, you know, there's going to be a big push, particularly Mike Brebman is big push now to go to tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of satellites and constellations that are providing ISR, weather, position, navigation, and timing, and also even missile defense in LEO. Rapid launch, another priority. So again, I mean, you know, the military and the intelligence community, they have priorities. They don't have unlimited resources. And right now, while they're talking about on-orbit servicing, thinking about it, the resource to go do something about that with a commercial firm is lagging. And so that's kind of the reality of where it is right now.